begins with the sound of a scream, high-pitched and panicked, shattering the stillness of a lakeside evening. My daughter was the one screaming, and when I rounded the corner of the cabin, heart hammering like a piston in overdrive, I saw her standing frozen beneath the cold barrel of a silver revolver. The woman holding it, Pam Weston, stood with her jaw clenched, her posture stiff with the kind of authority that doesn't come from law, but from arrogance. And in that moment I understood. This wasn't a neighborly dispute. This was a declaration of war. She wanted obedience. She wanted control. And she wanted it dressed up in the cheap costume of an HOA regulation. Her words cut across the space between us like razor wire. You will join the association, or you and your daughter will regret it. I can still remember the way the gun looked against the fading sun, glinting like it had been waiting for this exact performance. But here's the part she didn't know, the part that would detonate everything she thought she controlled. My daughter isn't just another resident. She's law enforcement, a sheriff's deputy who doesn't bend when fear knocks on the door. But before that truth came to light, we were already caught in a spiral. You see, the gun wasn't the beginning. It was the crescendo of something much darker. It started with paper, not bullets. Fake violation notices plastered across our doors, mysterious charges scrawled across fraudulent invoices, whispers spreading through neighbors like a contagion designed to isolate us. Every move Pam made was a stitch in her tapestry of control. And when we didn't fold, when we asked questions instead of paying blind, she escalated. First with sabotage, then with surveillance, then with social humiliation, until finally she thought a gun would end the conversation. That's what these stories are really about, not just one unhinged nay, GH bore, but the systems that breed them. Power without oversight, rules without justice. And the terrifying truth that in communities across this country, ordinary families are walking into invisible cages built by people who call themselves boards and associations. You may think this story is about my family, but listen closely. It's about all of us. Because what started as a lakeside dream ended with a barrel to my daughter's chest. And what we uncovered after that was far more dangerous than one gun. When the gun lowered, slowly, almost ceremonially, I realized something chilling. Pam hadn't expected me to react with fear. She expected compliance. That weapon wasn't for killing. It was for branding, a mark of ownership over anyone who dared to resist her grip on this neighborhood. The revolver was a prop in her theater of control, and she wielded it like an actress rehearsing a role she'd been playing for years. But beneath the performance, I saw the cracks. Her hand trembled, not from weakness, but from obsession, the kind of tremor that comes when someone has convinced themselves they are judge, jury, and executioner. She muttered about community harmony, about standards, about how outsiders always poison what we've built. Words wrapped in civility, sharpened into threats. Emily, my wife, stepped forward that night after Pam stormed away, and she said something I'll never forget. This isn't about HOA rules. This is about control. She was right. The violations, the fines, the sabotage, those weren't mistakes. They were rituals. Initiation rites designed to test whether we would fold or fight. And as we dug deeper, the story grew darker. The so-called association wasn't registered with the state. The bylaws were stitched together from stolen templates online. The financial records, when you looked closely, were nothing more than money funneled into a personal account, net with Pam's name attached. It wasn't an HOA, it was a con dressed up as authority, and she had weaponized the very idea of community to trap people. Neighbors told us in hushed tones that Pam had driven 3 other families out before us. One man sold his cabin at half its value after his tires were slashed, his mail stolen, and his dog poisoned. Another family simply vanished, their property snapped up at auction by a trust connected to Pam's relatives. It was a cycle: break resistance, seize assets, tighten control. And still, the question burned inside me. Why? Why put so much effort into a lakeside community that wasn't even legally hers to govern? Why orchestrate sabotage, humiliation, and even violence over something that should have been as simple as neighborhood cooperation? The answer, I would soon learn, had nothing to do with lakeside rules. It had everything to do with power. Pure, unfiltered, corrupt power. The first time my daughter spoke up, it changed everything. Until that moment, she had been silent, studying, analyzing, waiting. But when Pam cornered her in the driveway the next morning with a camera live streaming to dozens of watchers online, my daughter's voice cut through the performance like a blade. "Put the phone down. This isn't legal, and you know it." Pam laughed, a brittle, artificial sound. "Sweetheart," she sneered, "you don't get to decide what's legal here. I do." That was the moment I saw it, the shift in my daughter's eyes. The quiet steel of someone who has stood in front of liars, thieves, and predators before. She wasn't just my daughter anymore. She was the sheriff. And though Pam didn't realize it yet, she was standing toe-to-toe with law itself. Still, my daughter didn't reveal her badge. Not yet. She wanted evidence. Proof that this wasn't just neighborhood drama, but organized harassment with criminal intent. She whispered to us later that night, "If I show my hand too early, she'll bury the trail. We need to let her think she's in control." And so we played along, documenting very thing. The fabricated fines, the threats delivered in the dead of night, the mysterious men who began appearing at the edges of our property with clipboards and cameras. They weren't neighbors, they were Pam's enforcers, and the more they appeared, the more I realized she wasn't working alone. One evening, as the sun bled across the lake, we spotted Alan Harper, the so-called documentation specialist. He arrived in a black SUV with tinted windows, carrying binders thick with contracts and financial records. He spoke in legal jargon, throwing around phrases like mandatory compliance and regulatory enforcement. But the documents he held bore seals from states hundreds of miles away. None of them applied here. They weren't law. They were theater, dressed in the costume of legitimacy. My daughter leaned close and whispered, "He's not a lawyer. He's a front." And then came the detail that made my stomach drop. One of those contracts contained routing numbers, not to a bank, to a personal PayPal account in Pam's name. This wasn't about dues, it was financial predation, a shadow economy built on fear. Pam wasn't just a bully, she was running a racket, and her gun wasn't the only weapon. The first act of sabotage was subtle, almost easy to dismiss. A tire slashed on my truck, staples driven deep into the sidewall where no stray debris could ever reach. I knew the difference. Years in my garage taught me how to read the wounds machines carry. This wasn't random. It was deliberate, a warning carved into rubber. The second act wasn't subtle at all. We woke one morning to find notice of non-compliance stamped across our front door in dripping red paint. Not ink, not markers, paint, smeared by hand, the streaks running down like blood. My daughter's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She was measuring the escalation, waiting for the moment to strike back. And the neighbors? I pretended not to see. Eyes shifted away when we walked down the gravel road. Conversation stopped mid-sentence when we approached. One man we hadn't met before muttered, "Best just to pay her, folks. Makes life easier." Then he disappeared inside his cabin and slammed the door. It was then I understood the depth of Pam's hold. This wasn't just fear, it was complicity. She had poisoned the well so completely that silence had become survival. Families had learned the cost of resistance, and most had chosen the safety of obedience over the risk of defiance. But silence is never neutral. Silence feeds the predator. And with each day we refused to kneel, Pam's obsession grew sharper, more theatrical. She staged live compliance inspections at our property line, narrating to her online audience about how some residents failed to meet community standards. She smiled at the camera, but her eyes burned with fury because we weren't breaking. And then came the night the water shut off. Not a burst pipe, not a municipal error. The valve at the back fence had been turned with a wrench. My tools confirmed it. Someone had trespassed, crossed into our property, and cut off the most basic element of life. Emily whispered, "She's testing how far she can push us." And she was right. Because every act of sabotage wasn't just an attack on our home. It was a probe into our limits. Pam wanted to know when we would snap. What she didn't know was that we were already documenting everything, every notice, every act, every face that lingered too long at the edge of our yard. My daughter was building a case in silence, and Pam was giving her everything she needed. The turning point came not with a threat, but with a smile. My daughter, calm and steady, began playing Pam's game back at her. When Pam launched into one of her late-night rants about community order on Facebook Live, my daughter appeared in the background, silent, expression unreadable, just long enough to make the viewers wonder who she was. She didn't say a word. But her presence unsettled Pam. I saw it in the way her voice faltered for the first time. Control depends on certainty. Doubt is poison to tyrants. From that moment, my daughter started leaving bait. A copy of our security footage slipped into Pam's mailbox, showing her enforcers rifling through our documents. A screenshot of the PayPal account quietly circulated among select neighbors who still had a flicker of conscience left. A polite but firm email sent to Pam, quoting laws and statutes she clearly hadn't researched, reminding her that her mandatory fees bore no legal standing. Pam's response was predictable. Rage disguised as authority. She doubled down, plastering new notices on our doors, this time stamped with symbols, emblems that looked official but weren't tied to any government agency. My daughter photographed every single one. Evidence. Meanwhile, Alan, her so-called specialist, began appearing more often. He'd corner neighbors, whispering poison, suggesting that we were troublemakers, that Emily's job history was questionable, that my garage was a hazard to community safety. Classic smear tactics. But what he didn't know was that my daughter had already traced his name. No law license, no firm. Just a paper trail of shell companies linked to Pam's family. Every move they made, she documented. Every lie they told, she cross-referenced. She was weaving her own net, and Pam, too blind with arrogance, didn't even realize she was walking into it. But the real brilliance wasn't in the evidence. It was in the patience. My daughter understood the psychology of predators. You don't confront them at their strongest. You let them overextend, expose themselves, grow reckless. You let their hunger betray them. And sure enough, Pam's hunger grew. She wanted us broken publicly. She wanted the whole community to witness our humiliation. So she scheduled a compliance hearing, inviting every neighbor to watch her deliver the final blow. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the stage she was building wasn't for us. It was for her. The community center smelled of dust and desperation, folding chairs lined in neat rows, neighbors whispering, eyes darting anywhere but at us. At the front sat Pam, elevated behind a table draped with a fake banner that read Lakeside Compliance Board. The words carried no legal weight, but in this room they were treated like gospel. And beside her, Alan stacked his binders high, his smirk daring anyone to challenge the theater they had built. Pam began with her usual venom wrapped in velvet. She called us non-cooperative, accused us of eroding harmony, hinted at mysterious violations too vague to contest but sharp enough to wound reputation. Every word was performance, designed not to prove guilt but to brand us outsiders. The neighbors shifted uncomfortably, some nodding along, others too afraid to breathe. Then my daughter stood, calm, silent for a long beat, and then she said, "Show me the law." The room froze. Pam blinked, thrown off rhythm. My daughter repeated it, louder this time. Show me the law that gives you this authority." Alan fumbled with his papers, shuffling mismatched forms, foreign state seals, even a QR code leading to that same PayPal account. The audience shifted now for a different reason. Doubt had entered the room. Pam's face reddened. She slammed her fist on the table, shouting about community order and respect for leadership. But the spell was breaking. My daughter's calm contrasted too sharply with Pam's unraveling rage. And then came the dagger. She pulled a single folder from her bag and placed it on the table. Inside was evidence, screenshots, recordings, financial trails, all linking Pam's so-called HOA directly to personal fraud. But still, she didn't reveal her badge, not yet, because this wasn't about ending it quickly. This was about exposing it completely. Pam hissed through clenched teeth, "You don't belong here." And my daughter, steady as stone, replied, "Neither do you." The room erupted in murmurs. The authority had cracked, and everyone felt it. Now, pause with me for a moment, viewer, because this is where you come in. If you've ever stood against false authority, if you've ever refused to surrender your identity to someone's control, drop this phrase twice in the comments right now. I am not yours. Write it once for yourself, and once for everyone still trapped. Pam had always hidden behind theatrics, forms, notices, cameras, words, but when words lost their grip, she reached for something sharper. The night after the so-called hearing, we heard the crunch of gravel outside, headlights off, doors slamming shut. 3 figures moved across our yard, dark silhouettes carrying crowbars and flashlights. My heart pounded, but my daughter's hand stayed steady on the curtain. "Let them," she whispered. "We need the line crossed." The first swing shattered a garden light. The second struck the siding of our house. A third man began wrenching at the water pump, sparks flying as metal tore. This wasn't intimidation anymore. This was destruction. And then Pam appeared, standing at the edge of the driveway with her phone raised, live streaming it all. Not hiding, not denying, broadcasting our torment as proof of her power. That was her mistake. My daughter stepped outside, flashlight in one hand, the other raised high. Her voice was calm but carried like a gunshot in the still night. "Enough." The men froze. Pam laughed nervously. "Oh look, the princess thinks she's in charge." That's when the badge came out. Cold, metallic, undeniable. Sheriff's office. Sworn authority. The air shifted instantly. The crowbars lowered. Even the crickets seemed to fall silent. Pam's live stream caught every second, her smirk curdling into panic as my daughter recited the charges. Trespassing, vandalism, harassment, fraud, Isa. Each word documented, each crime stacked like stones on a grave. Pam stammered, This is a misunderstanding." But her own voice on dozens of recorded videos said otherwise. My daughter ordered the men to drop their tools. 2 obeyed instantly, their bravado collapsing under the weight of real law. The third tried to run, but the cruiser lights flared at the end of the lane, backup arriving, sirens slicing through the night. For the first time, Pam wasn't in control of the stage. She was the spectacle. Her camera, still streaming, caught the cuffs sliding over her wrists. Her empire of fear ended not with applause but with silence. And as the deputies led her away, my daughter turned to me, her voice softer now. She thought she was writing our story, but she was just a character in mine. The morning after Pam's arrest, the gravel road felt different. For months it had been lined with closed curtains and turned backs, but now doors cracked open. Neighbors stepped onto porches, blinking into the daylight as though waking from a long sleep. Fear had held them still, but fear without its master begins to rot. The first to approach was the man who once whispered, "Just pay her." His voice shook as he said, "We didn't know what else to do." My daughter didn't scold him. She only replied, "You knew it wasn't right." The man nodded, ashamed, but it was the truth he needed to hear. Soon others spoke up. Stories spilled like water bursting from a dam. Secret payments, Threats against children, utilities cut off, jobs sabotaged by Alan's whispered campaigns. Each confession wove a tapestry of complicity and survival. Pam hadn't just bullied them, she had hollowed them out, replacing courage with silence. But silence has a breaking point, and now, with her gone, voices began to rise. Some neighbors offered to repair the damage to our siding. Others pooled money to restore the community water system Pam had siphoned. A retired teacher even volunteered to gather everyone and draft bylaws that actually reflected fairness. Real rules, not tools of control. Of course, not all were ready. A few still muttered about keeping peace and waiting to see if she came back. Trauma doesn't vanish in a single night. Some wounds scar, some fester. As for Alan, the so-called specialist, he vanished before dawn. His binders were found dumped in a ditch, pages soaked and smeared, evidence of his retreat. My daughter already had his name flagged. It was only a matter of time before law enforcement traced his fraud across county lines. Standing on our porch, I realized something profound. Victory wasn't the arrest. Victory was watching fear loosen its grip on ordinary people. Pam's power had never been the forms, the fees, the notices. It had been the silence of those who let her reign. And now that silence was cracking. My daughter looked at the neighbors gathering in small, uncertain circles and said, "This is the part no one live streams, the rebuilding." And she was right. The story wasn't just about taking Pam down. It was about what came after. Whether a community could stitch itself back together once it remembered how to speak. Pam was not unique. That's the hardest truth to accept. She was not some anomaly, some rare monster lurking in an otherwise safe world. She was ordinary, predictable, the kind of person who rises whenever fear is allowed to govern instead of courage. Her methods were nothing new. Control through paperwork no one dared question. Authority created by tone, not law. Punishment delivered in whispers, threats, and small humiliations. Every dictator, whether they rule a street, a neighborhood, or a nation, uses the same tools. Pam was simply a smaller mirror of a larger pattern, and that is why her fall matters. Not because of who she was, but because of what it revealed. That tyranny doesn't need armies or crowns, it only needs silence. Think about it. How many people watched Pam's live streams and felt uneasy but said not, "Hing"? How many neighbors suspected the fees were fake but paid anyway to avoid trouble? How many saw her enforcers creeping through the night but pulled the curtains tighter? Each choice felt small, but together they built her throne. Silence is the soil where corruption grows, and when one person, just one, chooses to break that silence, everything changes. My daughter did not defeat Pam with fists or fire. She defeated her with exposure, with patience, with truth, and with the courage to say no more when everyone else whispered just endure. That courage is contagious. I saw it in the neighbors as their voices returned. I saw it in the way they stopped whispering and started speaking. I saw it in the way the false documents once treated as sacred were now laughed at like cheap props in a bad play. Pam thought she had built an empire. In reality, she had built a cage, and the lock was nothing more than people's fear. When fear broke, so did the cage. But here's the part you, watching this, need to remember. Pam may be gone from this road, but there is another Pam in your workplace, your school board, your HOA, maybe even your family. She thrives in silence. She grows in shadows. And she only falls when someone dares to step into the light.